As one strategy in attempting to combat and deconstruct the traditional Eurocentrist view that arguably still dominates museums like this, we tried to be, if not user-led, at least user-informed by establishing with community members the Community Advisory Panel 6 years ago. It was an attempt to not only go some way towards democratizing the museum, but to open up the debates around worldviews, knowledge, authority, Eurocentrism, but most of all relevance to the museum's many communities and our neighboring communities and their concerns today. It's been a 6-year-long discussion and debate, and some members of the community panel are here. That's been at times extremely difficult, as the museum has been made to face its own culture, its own subtle and sometimes not so subtle prejudices, and the project-based ways of working that are often alienating to its community partners. There have been breakups and makeups and in the relationship, and highs and lows in an incredibly difficult process, of which I would say we've only begun to scratch the surface, as we've raised more questions often than answers. And always the question that we've come back to is the museum capable of changing enough to form real partnerships? And if not, what is that resistance about? If there is resistance, where does that resistance lie? What's at the base of it? Coming out of all of this, the Myths About Race exhibition was largely sparked by that remark I referred to earlier, but also by the research that Sam Alberti here on my right, who's a museum historian, did on the role of the museum itself, and especially science in this museum, in developing and establishing the mythologies around race and perpetuating them in the museum's own history. The origin, I would say, also goes back to those debates that we've been engaged in these past 6 years. The conclusion being that for the museum to begin to engage in an honest dialogue with its communities, it must begin to face its own past, its own culpability in creating hierarchical, racist notions of difference. Myths About Race, and I hope people here will have had a chance to have a look at the exhibition, is not a big exhibition. It's already been criticized for not being big enough. It is, however, a big subject, and it's deliberately centrally placed within the museum space. There are not multiple objects, but there are multiple points of view. The exhibition team decided to include some disturbing artifacts in order to illustrate how racist ideas were officially sanctioned by the presiding scientific community of the day, and I know Sam will talk some more about this, but also to use them as we wanted to use those objects as a platform for discussion. The exhibition, which although it's intended to be here for a long time, is not static. It will evolve based on input from audiences. It's also intended that it's a space where museum staff and volunteers can meet the public so as to facilitate informal discussion so that both can gain from the exchange. It raises difficult and sensitive issues, and as one person has already mentioned on a comment card, it leaves you wanting to talk to someone. It's intended that it is a place where people can do just that. People may or may not agree, and some people have raised strong objections already, as we somewhat expected. But all are encouraged to respond through the comment wall, and they certainly have. So we want people to use the exhibition to think about, interrogate, and critique, if necessary, the rest of the museum, and that's hence its central positioning. And tell us about that too, so the museum might learn and change. The process of making it, as I expect will come up, was an attempt at co-production. We're not making claims that we got it right. And we're committed to learning from the experience, and continuing to try to work in this way in most, if not all, of the museum's projects to come, and specifically around its exhibitions. So a record of the untidy, messy, and challenging, but hugely interesting debates and negotiations that took place was deliberately left inside the exhibition in a folder that people can take a look at. Because I think what I want to say finally, and I'm going to stop now, is that much of the process is in the dialogue,
And I think that's the most important thing. And for me, looking back at the 6 years with the Community Advisory Panel, it's the passion in the process. And ultimately, at the end of any project, as the Community Advisory Panel often remind us, it's the relationships that matter. So with that, we hope shared goodwill and honest intentions. It's the idea that we wanted to come together and have an open and honest dialogue tonight. And it was certainly to look not only at the Manchester Museum to be so self-indulgent, but to share this view and reflection on museums in general here in the Northwest.